The first time it happened, I thought it was an accident. Wind, maybe.
A raccoon.
Something normal. I came home from work, turned into my driveway, and saw my trash can lying on its side like it had fainted dramatically in the middle of the driveway. Trash bags were torn open, soda cans rolling toward the gutter, and something unidentifiable leaking onto the concrete. Annoying, sure, but not alarming. I cleaned it up, stood the bin back where it belonged, and moved on with my evening. The second time, I noticed a pattern. Same day of the week. Same time window. Same exact angle, like someone had taken the time to knock it over properly instead of letting gravity do the job. This time the lid was snapped clean off its hinge, and my recycling bin, usually untouched, was tipped too. That's when my gut started whispering that this wasn't random. This was deliberate. I live on the edge of an HOA neighborhood. My property is technically outside the HOA, but my driveway runs along the same street as theirs. Close enough for drama. Close enough for opinions. Too far for authority. I'd already had minor run-ins before, notes about approved trash can placement, complaints about my fence color, a warning that I was setting a bad example. I ignored all of it because legally, they had no power over me. Apparently, someone didn't like being ignored. The third time sealed it. I came home early that day and parked down the street instead of pulling into the driveway. As I walked up, I saw her. HOA Karen. Clipboard tucked under one arm like a weapon, sunglasses perched on her head, lips pursed in righteous concentration. She looked both ways, barely, then shoved my trash can hard enough that it scraped across the concrete before crashing down. She didn't jump, didn't flinch, didn't act surprised. She just nodded to herself, scribbled something on her clipboard, and walked away like she'd just corrected a civic issue. I stood there, frozen, trash bag in my hand, watching her disappear around the corner. That moment flipped a switch in my brain. I could have confronted her right then. I could have yelled, argued, threatened legal action. But I've learned something important over the years. People like her don't respond to confrontation. They respond to consequences. Quiet ones. Permanent ones. The kind they walk straight into thinking they're still in control. So, I did what she didn't expect. Nothing. For 2 weeks, I let it happen. Every trash day, my bin ended up on its side. Sometimes crushed, sometimes dragged a few feet, sometimes opened and rummaged through like she was inspecting evidence. Neighbors watched. Some apologized. Some shrugged. HOA Karen, meanwhile, started getting bold, standing there longer, knocking it over harder, even tooting loudly as she did it. She wanted a reaction. Instead, I started planning. I checked local ordinances. I reviewed property boundaries. I confirmed camera laws. I measured distances. I ran scenarios. And most importantly, I waited until she was comfortable, until knocking over my trash can felt routine to her. Automatic. Safe. By the end of the second week, I knew her schedule better than she knew mine. And I had installed something in my driveway that she absolutely, positively did not see coming. Preparation is where patience turns into power. While HOA Karen was busy perfecting her trash can tipping routine, I was doing homework. I pulled city maps, zoning diagrams, and easement records. My driveway, my curb space, and the exact placement of my trash cans were all clearly within my property line. No shared access. No HOA jurisdiction. No gray area. If this ever escalated, I wanted facts stacked so neatly that even her clipboard would be impressed. Next came documentation. I installed 2 discrete security cameras. Nothing flashy, nothing obvious. One faced the driveway from the eaves, angled just enough to capture the trash cans without pointing into the street. The second sat lower, hidden near a decorative planter, covering the approach angle. Both were legal, compliant, and quietly recording every smug clipboard walk by. I didn't put up warning signs. I didn't change my routine. I wanted her comfortable. And comfortable she was. By week 3, HOA Karen had added flair. She didn't just knock the can over anymore. She shoved it, sometimes kicked it, once even muttered something about neighborhood standards while doing it. One afternoon, she stopped to lecture a passing neighbor about how some people refuse to cooperate. The neighbor nodded awkwardly and avoided eye contact with my driveway like it was radioactive. That's when I knew she felt untouchable. The thing about bullies, especially the self-appointed rule enforcer type, is that they assume compliance is the natural order of the world. They mistake silence for weakness. They think authority exists because they say it does. And once they believe that, they stop watching their step. My plan wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about embarrassment. It was about ending the behavior permanently without giving her a single sentence she could twist into victimhood. No shouting. No threats. No confrontations she could spin at the next HOA meeting. Instead, I built a solution. Trash day came again.
Same time.
Same weather. Same smug confidence. HOA Karen rounded the corner, clipboard ready, and approached my driveway like she owned it. She didn't notice the subtle changes, the slightly repositioned bin, the reinforced base, the new installation hidden in plain sight. She reached out.
She shoved.
And instantly, everything went wrong for her. The trash can didn't tip. It didn't budge. It didn't even wobble. Instead, her momentum carried her forward, and she stumbled, arms flailing, clipboard flying out of her hand. She caught herself at the last second, feet skidding, face flashing from confusion to anger in under a second. She tried again, pushed harder this time. Nothing. The can stayed exactly where it was. She stepped back, squinted, leaned in, and finally noticed what she'd been missing. The base of the trash can was secured to a low-profile ground anchor, bolted cleanly into the concrete, flush with the surface, painted to blend in perfectly. Industrial grade. Legal.
Permanent. She froze.
I watched it all live from my phone. She tugged once more, weaker now, then looked around like someone who just realized the joke was on them. Neighbors were watching. Someone laughed. Someone else pulled out their phone. HOA Karen straightened up, grabbed her clipboard, and walked away stiffly, pretending nothing had happened. But she wasn't done. And neither was I. The next move was predictable. When public confidence cracks, people like HOA Karen don't reflect, they escalate. Less than 48 hours after the trash can incident, I received the first official-looking notice taped to my door. Yellow paper. Bold header. Words like violation, noncompliance, and immediate corrective action sprinkled generously across the page. It cited unauthorized modification of waste receptacles and claimed I was creating a potential safety hazard by altering community standard equipment. There was even a fine amount listed at the bottom, complete with a deadline and a threat of further action if ignored. The problem? I wasn't part of the HOA. Never had been. My property predated the development. My deed was separate. My trash service contract was with the city, not the neighborhood association. And that ground anchor? Fully within my property line, installed by a licensed contractor, compliant with municipal code. So instead of ripping the notice down or storming over to her house, I did something far more effective. I emailed it. I sent copies of the footage, calmly clipped, time-stamped, crystal clear, showing her repeatedly tipping my trash can over on multiple dates. I attached property maps highlighting boundaries. I included city code references confirming my right to secure waste containers against interference. And finally, I added a short, polite message addressed to the HOA board, not to her.
It read,
I believe one of your members may be acting outside the authority of the association. Please advise how you'd like to proceed. No accusations. No insults. Just facts, lined up neatly. The response didn't come from Karen. It came from the HOA president. Within hours. The tone was different. Gone was the confidence, replaced with careful phrasing and apologies dressed as clarifications. They acknowledged that my property was not under HOA jurisdiction and stated that the notice had been issued, in error, by a volunteer acting independently. Volunteer. That word did a lot of heavy lifting. But here's where things shifted. Because once the board knew, they couldn't unknow. And once documentation exists, behavior changes fast. Karen didn't come near my driveway for a full week. Trash day passed peacefully. No tipped cans. No clipboard patrols. Then the neighbors started talking. I'd see them glance at the anchored can, then at me. A few stopped by casually, pretending to ask about weather or trash schedules before finally saying it. So, was that about her? Someone else laughed and said, I saw the video. Apparently, Karen's stumble had become neighborhood folklore. That's when I noticed the second change. HOA Karen started avoiding eye contact entirely. Where she used to march with purpose, she now crossed the street. Where she once lectured loudly, she whispered. Authority, it turns out, is fragile when it's built on intimidation instead of legitimacy. But the real turning point came the following trash day. She showed up again. Not to push. Not to knock over anything. She stood at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, clearly debating with herself. I watched from inside as she scanned the area, checking for cameras she now knew existed but couldn't see. Finally, she took out her phone and snapped a photo of the trash can. Then she left. Later that evening, I received one final message from the HOA board. They confirmed that Karen had been formally instructed not to interact with my property again, and that any further incidents would be considered harassment, not HOA enforcement. It was quiet after that. No notes. No knocks. No accidents. Just a trash can that stood exactly where it belonged, and a neighborhood that finally understood the difference between authority and arrogance. And the funny thing? I never said a word to her. Silence has a sound when you've lived next to noise long enough. After weeks of chaos, clipboard patrols, and tipped trash cans, the calm felt almost suspicious. Trash day arrived and passed without incident. No footsteps on the driveway. No plastic scraping concrete. No dramatic sighs of disapproval drifting through the morning air. Just birds, wind, and the quiet clunk of the sanitation truck doing its job. That's when the realization set in. This wasn't just over for me. It was over for her. HOA Karen had built her identity around enforcement. She wasn't just a neighbor with opinions. She was the self-appointed guardian of standards. When that authority evaporated, it left a vacuum. And vacuums don't stay empty for long. Neighbors started noticing patterns they'd ignored before. Someone mentioned how she used to measure lawn edges with a ruler. Another recalled being fined for leaving holiday lights up one day too long. Stories surfaced casually at first, then with growing confidence. People compared notes. They laughed. They shared screenshots. The fear that had kept them compliant dissolved into something much more dangerous for someone like Karen: collective awareness. One afternoon, I saw a small group gathered near the mailboxes. Karen was there too, standing stiffly while someone else spoke, calmly, firmly, without deference. She tried to interrupt. It didn't work. For the first time, she wasn't leading the conversation. She was being corrected. That night, a neighborhood-wide email went out from the HOA board. Not naming names, but clear enough. It outlined boundaries. It clarified that harassment, intimidation, or interference with non-HOA properties would not be tolerated. It emphasized that authority must always align with jurisdiction. That sentence did more damage than any confrontation ever could, because it reframed everything. Suddenly, Karen wasn't the enforcer. She was the liability. The following week, something else changed. The HOA meetings, once sparsely attended, were suddenly full. Homeowners asked questions, requested transparency, wanted to know who approved what and why. Karen still showed up, still carried her clipboard, but no one deferred to it anymore. When she spoke, people listened politely and then challenged her. Power hates scrutiny. Trash day came again. I rolled the anchored can to the curb, same as always. As I turned back toward the house, I noticed Karen watching from across the street. No clipboard this time. No phone. Just a look I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It was uncertainty. She didn't cross the street. Didn't approach. Didn't say a word. And that was the point. Because the anchor wasn't really about the trash can. It was about drawing a line, quietly, legally, immovably. It forced a choice: respect the boundary or expose yourself. She chose exposure, and once that happened, the illusion shattered. Weeks passed. The cameras stayed up, though they captured nothing worth saving. The can stayed upright. Life normalized. And slowly, Karen faded into the background of the neighborhood she once tried to control. I never filed a police report, never sued, never raised my voice. I let documentation, patience, and a single well-placed solution do all the talking. Sometimes the most effective way to deal with entitlement isn't to fight it head-on, but to remove the stage it performs on. And once that stage is gone, the performance ends on its own. But the story wasn't quite finished yet, because consequences have a way of echoing. And what happened next made it very clear that everyone had been paying attention all along. The echo came quietly, the way real consequences usually do. Not with shouting or sirens, but with small shifts that add up until everyone notices. About a month after the anchored trash can incident, a notice appeared in mailboxes announcing updated HOA elections. New roles, new committees, new community participation opportunities. It sounded routine, until you read between the lines. Karen's name was missing. Neighbors noticed immediately. Conversations sparked on sidewalks and driveways. Someone joked that the clipboard must have finally retired. Another said they'd heard she stepped down voluntarily. No one believed that part. Power like hers never leaves willingly. It's removed piece by piece. Once enough people stop being afraid of it. I didn't attend the meeting where it happened, but I heard the story afterward from 3 different people, and the details lined up too neatly to ignore. Questions were asked. Footage was referenced, not just mine but others. Patterns were pointed out. Fines that made no sense. Warnings that felt personal. Enforcement that didn't match the rules. Karen tried to defend herself. Tried to frame it as dedication. As caring too much. It didn't land. When authority relies on intimidation, it collapses the moment confidence replaces fear. And once neighbors realized they could say no without consequences, everything shifted. Votes were cast. Positions changed hands. New guidelines were adopted. Transparency became more than a buzzword. By the time the meeting ended, Karen no longer had any official standing. No role. No power. No clipboard-backed legitimacy. The next trash day was almost symbolic. I wheeled the can out as usual, sunlight catching the metal anchor at its base. Across the street, Karen stood on her porch, watching. For a moment, I thought she might say something, anything, but she didn't. She turned and went back inside, closing the door softly behind her. That was the last time I saw her pay any attention to my property. Life settled into a new normal after that. Friendlier waves. Longer conversations. People stopped whispering and started laughing again. It was amazing how much lighter the neighborhood felt without one person constantly policing it. The kids played louder. The adults relaxed. The unspoken tension lifted. And my trash can? It stayed exactly where it belonged. Every once in a while, a neighbor would ask about the anchor, how much it cost, who installed it, whether it was allowed. I'd explain calmly, always emphasizing the same thing. It wasn't about winning. It was about protecting your space without becoming the villain in someone else's story. Because here's the truth no entitled person ever understands. Boundaries don't need to be loud to be effective. They just need to be firm, lawful, and impossible to ignore. I never confronted Karen. Never humiliated her publicly. Never escalated emotionally. I let her actions speak for themselves and trusted that, given enough light, behavior like that collapses under its own weight. And it always does. Sometimes, justice isn't a dramatic showdown. Sometimes it's a quiet adjustment that forces the right outcome. A single decision that changes the balance of power and reminds everyone watching that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. All it took was patience, proof, and one trash can she definitely didn't see coming. And honestly, I'd do it the same way again.